The unifying thread is the sort of broader politics of Donald Trump, the ethnocentric nationalism. He did not react this way when a white person shot dozens of people in Las Vegas. He did not come and say, well, we have to do an immediate policy change. We need to give this guy the death penalty.
Wow. On that note, we are going to begin Alternative Facts. Welcome. Sagar and Jetty, my colleague Kevin Daly. We're with the Daily Caller News Foundation. What the hell did I just hear, Kevin?
You know, probably one of the most shocking things I've ever heard on a cable roundtable. That was a Wall Street Journal reporter faulting President Trump for not seeking the death penalty for a man who has been dead for some weeks at this point. I think what's so remarkable, about that exchange is that, in the first place, so many reporters are willing to bludgeon any set of facts to correspond, to a narrative that's favorable to them. But I think what's more revealing here is sometimes the total lack of preparation that goes into cable segments, right? And people need to appreciate how cable booking works, right? Oftentimes, especially in breaking news situations, producers are calling reporters on their cell phones while they're in the middle of unrelated work and asking them to hustle over to the studio so they can do a quick hit. This, does not allow many reporters the time that they need to think about the topic they're going to discuss and to do the required research. And as such, you regularly have pretty good reporters going on television and making really goofy mistakes like that.
The junk that you hear is that they bring their preconceived notions and not actual information. So you really get the worst of all worlds.
Yeah.
But we're going to move on from that. And before we do, can everybody start checking in, please?
Yeah.
Where are my check-ins? I need to see your comments. I need to see your location. I want you to share your location with both of us. Comment down below. Let me know where you're coming in from. All right?
If you have just escaped jail time for a grievous crime against your fellow servicemen in the United States, it's important that you check in.
Yeah, absolutely. Please check in so I and everybody else knows exactly where you are. So, George Papadopoulos. That's one of the big stories here in Washington, or is it that big of a story? Basically what happened is that Special Counsel Robert Mueller issued indictments against Paul Manafort, his associate, and George Papadopoulos, who was some low-level foreign policy aide who had some dealings with the Russians. Kevin, is this a big deal? Is it not a big deal? What is the media saying that's true and not true?
Well, it's a big deal, but it's important that we keep Papadopoulos in perspective. It is, of course, a big deal that the special counsel has handed down indictments against a member of the Trump campaign, in this case for giving false statements to FBI investigators. But what their investigation revealed was that this low-level foreign policy aide actively sought to collaborate with the Russians and discussed the possibility of collaborating with the Russians with senior members of the Trump campaign, including Sam Clovis and Paul Manafort. This is an important revelation, but it's also important that we keep who George Papadopoulos was in perspective. So on your screen, you should see a picture of President Trump sitting at a table with George Papadopoulos. You've probably seen that picture all over the front pages of your local newspaper, all over cable news. It's important to note that as far as we know, that is the only picture that exists of President Trump with George Papadopoulos.
So wait, just think about that though. Is that since that's the only picture and they're blaring it everywhere, you are immediately going to think, wow, they were at the same table. They had such a close relationship.
What were they discussing during this meeting?
That is the only time they ever met, hence the use of the photo.
Yeah. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders told us that, to the best of her knowledge, that was the only time President Trump ever met Mr. Papadopoulos. And there's another note that I want to, it's also important to note that he was not a paid member of the campaign.
He was a volunteer.
Right, he served on a committee that, as far as we know, did not often meet to discuss foreign policy. But I want to note one other thing about George Papadopoulos, and this was just my own reading of the Papadopoulos indictment, which is such a fun name to say, Papadopoulos, that was handed down on Monday. Papadopoulos should be a familiar type to many people who live in Washington. Papadopoulos, based on my reading of the indictment, is a big talker. He made repeated misrepresentations about the nature of his communications with the Russians to members of the Trump campaign. This is, by the way, like a 30-year-old guy with no meaningful policy achievements.
He listed Model UN on his resume as part of his
This guy is 30 years old. He was an energy and oil consultant, and he was a research associate on a part-time basis, as I understand it, for the Hudson Institute. Not a serious foreign policy guy,
not at all.
but talked up his resume a lot, it seems, in landing this position with the Trump campaign. Offered during during one meeting of the council, he claimed that he had the connections requisite to broker a summit between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Bear in mind, this is a 30-year-old with no meaningful accomplishments. Claimed that he was, dialoguing with senior members of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he's in his emails with members of the Trump campaign. The point is, he's a big talker. He made repeated misrepresentations about the nature of his communications, exaggerated a great deal about who exactly his connections in the greater, amongst Russian officials were. And this is a classic Washington type. This is the young, low-level staffer with no meaningful accomplishments, who's had too much to drink at happy hour, who talks himself up, to colleagues. He's just a classic Washington hanger-on who clung his way to a modicum of success, and it's important to keep that in perspective.
Many of the people who are dissecting his comments and saying full-blown collusion are exactly the same ones who exhibit this type of behavior. But this is all a really good segue to our third segment here, and that is basically CNN being about 3 months late to news that the Daily Caller had a couple months back. So what's happening here?
So CNN was reporting that the Attorney General Jeff Sessions is the subject of yet more scrutiny on Capitol Hill. There's concern that he may not have made a disclosure about when possible collaboration with the Russians was discussed in the course of the campaign. You'll recall he's been asked many times in sworn testimony before the Senate about what communications he had with Russian officials, when collaboration with Russia might have been discussed during the campaign. It turns out he did not disclose a conversation that was had about possible collaboration back in, as I recall, March of 2016. He did not disclose this meeting.
Okay.
The Daily Caller reported that this meeting took place
in August. Yeah, so we literally had the story, like the Daily Caller had the story months ago about Sessions shooting down said meeting and not reporting it. Nobody else picked it up. Then CNN has the gall to report it as an exclusive.
It is really galling. It's an outrageous way to treat our colleague Chuck Ross, who is a first-rate reporter. Also, interesting twist: the person in this meeting who brought up possible collaboration with the Russians was George Papadopoulos.
Yeah, George Papadopoulos.
And according to our reporting, two sources in the room say Jeff Sessions immediately shot Papadopoulos' proposal down.
That's the main thing.
Which should assuage Democratic senators and a lot of Trump critics.
Yeah, and the main story that CNN and the rest of these people are bringing out of this is that Sessions failed to disclose when in reality he shot down an attempt at actual collusion.
Right.
So when collusion was raised, legitimate, prosecutable, bad collusion, Jeff Sessions was like, no, absolutely not.
And do you know what else? What else is interesting about this too is that CNN had that goofy ad, a couple of weeks ago, swearing up and down about their commitment to fact-based journalism, and that's fine. But here, the Daily Caller introduced a new set of facts to discussion about possible Russian collaboration that was, for months, ignored by much of the media, and it just goes to show that the presence of good factual reporting is not enough. That that there's just this massive chasm that the mainstream media erects around itself that prevents even good factual reporting from penetrating its epistemic chamber. That it's just not enough to assemble good, solid facts. It only matters if the mainstream media takes cognizance of those facts, and so often they don't.
Having the facts isn't the key.
It's not enough.
It's not what they care about. It's about whether they can arrange a fact pattern into a narrative that is bad for the president or fits something that they are trying to push.
And it's about whether you can penetrate their pre-existing networks. And that's a huge problem.
Let's see, honestly. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Kevin Daly, Sagar and Jetty with the Daily Caller News Foundation. Don't forget to check in.
Have a good weekend.